Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to explore the difference between a symphony and a symphonic poem. But I'm not going to do it in this sort of, pedagogical way. I just have a list here. I have a list here of a pile of symphonic poems, or symphonic poem-like things, or symphonic suite things, which are descriptive music, symphonic music, but multi-movement symphonic music that could be very similar to a symphony. I mean, it's up to you to decide whether you think they really are or they really aren't. And maybe we can talk a little bit about why they might be or might not be. You see, in music, in all of our musical things, terminology is loose. It really is loose. And often the textbook definition of something is completely and utterly apart from what actually happens in real life. And that is true of the terms symphony and symphonic poem, or anything else symphonic. Because a symphony, in its most sort of traditional definition, is a multi-movement piece in which one of those movements is written in sonata form. Classical sonata form, that is, with an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation, sort of. That's a symphony. However, that completely rules out a heck of a lot of pieces called symphonies. There's Sibelius's 5th, 6th, and 7th, none of which fit the textbook definition, but which are so organic and logically symphonic. Even Sibelius was unsure whether to call the 7th a symphonic fantasia or a symphony, because it only has one movement, even though it has multiple sections within that movement. Those multiple sections don't follow normal symphonic form at all. And there are many, many others, especially as we get to the 20th century. The definition becomes far, far blurrier because people wrote abstract pieces of music that they did not want to say, oh, well, this is about a tree or something like that. It's a symphony, but it doesn't follow traditional form. So the terminology is fluid. Styles are fluid. But here I have 21 pieces, all of which have a bunch of movements, either 3 or 4, and so it could be argued that they are symphonies, especially since some of them involve considerable thematic development, and many of them actually, quote themes from individual movements. They have organic cohesion in various ways. Some of them have movements in sonata form, even, or it could be argued they follow that kind of a pattern. So, let's just go through the list, shall we? We're going to run down the list, which is down below here, so you can look at them all, of course, and we'll take it from there. Number 1, Richard Strauss, Aus Italien, from Italy. Now, I love Aus Italien. This is Strauss's first major tone poem, and it has 4 separate movements, and they are delightful and beautiful and fun to listen to, and it's as close to a symphony, actually. It probably makes no difference, except the sequence is not the normal sequence, and it's unquestionably, you could argue that it's a 4-movement symphony piece, but it's about Italy. And for some people, a symphony can't be about anything, or at least anything other than the expression of feelings and emotions in an abstract sense. If it starts to be about something, then it is no longer a symphony. By that definition, something like Goldmark's Rustic Wedding Symphony, which I adore, is not a symphony because it's about a rustic wedding. And also, it doesn't have any movements in sonata form, or the first one certainly isn't. It's a theme and variations. So, like I said, we can get into these details ad nauseum, but I think Strauss's Aus Italien is a wonderful opening because it's a German work, and Germans are supposed to really know what symphonies are. So there you go. Take your pick. Is it or isn't it? Next, Gustave Charpentier, Impressions d'Italie, Impressions of Italy. Well, this is Aus Italien, goes to France. It's a multi-movement orchestral extravaganza, several movements about Italy. One of the things you'll notice about these symphonic poems that could be symphonic is that a lot of them are inspired either by sort of nature things or by places. They are pictures of locales. And that locale concept is quite popular when it comes to designating something a symphonic poem as opposed to a symphony, even if it does all the things a symphony is supposed to do. The Charpentier piece is just lovely. It's wonderful. It's been recorded a couple times. Doesn't get any play. Nobody cares. No one cares. Charpentier, wrote the marvelous opera Louise, which is one of the glories of French opera that no one pays attention to. It's terrific. Anyway, so there you go. Impressions of Italy. 2 impressions of Italy, symphonic poems, which could actually masquerade as symphonies. Next, Vítězslav Novák, the Czech composer. Pan. Well, what is Pan? Pan is a 5-movement symphonic extravaganza. Originally, he called it a symphonic poem for piano solo, because it was written for piano solo. Then it was orchestrated. And so it exists in both versions. And it's as big and symphonic a thing as anybody ever turned out. It truly, truly is. And it's beautiful and it's fun, and you should really listen to it. And it's about all kinds of things. It's about mountains, and it's about women. One of the movements is called Woman. So it's got a lot of stuff in it. And if he had called it the something mountainous woman symphony, we would have not questioned it, not a bit. Fascinating work, big major work in both of its incarnations. Then the 3 of them by Debussy. Debussy gets 3 listings because we have La Mer, we have the Nocturnes, and we have Iberia. Now, all of these things are triptychs. They all consist of 3 movements. La Mer is the most symphonic of all of them, I think, because it actually is a piece that involves some sort of, Frankian-style cyclical form. None of the forms are sonata forms particularly, but it really is a 3-movement unified organism sort of thing. And some of you have even asked me, said, could we consider it a symphony? Well, yeah, you could. You definitely could. Would I call it a symphony? Well, no, not really. Each movement is quite specific as to what it represents, and that's the business it has. I think maybe in some of these pieces, what makes it non-symphonic is that it's not about human emotion. And that, in other words, it's not about people. It's about things. It's about stuff. It may be gorgeous, it may be beautiful, and it may express that stuff in terms of the feelings that stuff arouses in us. But the concept is not to show the evolution or trace a pattern of emotional expression purely. The play of the waves is delightful, and it might make us giggle. It could make us happy. It could express happiness, but it's not exactly a personalization. So there's that on the other side of the argument. Of course, the nocturnes are nocturnes. That raises the question of whether a bunch of nocturnes can be a symphony. Well, why not? If Mahler's 7th can be called the Song of the Night and arguably consists of 5 nocturnal pieces of music in one way or another, then why can't Debussy's Nocturnes? You tell me. And then there's Iberia, which is a 3-movement, slow, fast, very symphonic piece with like La Mer, considerable amount of thematic sharing between the outer movements in any case. And so, yeah, why not? Why not? It's I think that's just actually has a pretty good chance of earning the title symphony. But like the Aus Italiens, it's about a place. It's about Spain. So there you go. And then, of course, there's the Torino's Sinfonia Sevillana, which is about Seville, and it's called a symphony. So there you go, you see? It works both ways. So after that, well, this was an interesting piece I heard fairly recently and talked about Moritz Moszkowski's Joan of Arc symphonic poem, which is really a 4-movement symphony, and it's about Joan of Arc. Do I think it's a great piece of music? Well, not exactly. I have to listen to it a few more times before it really settles. I think it has some dead spots, but it's a fascinating piece of music, and it's certainly a symphonic-looking symphonic poem. And obviously, really, you could call it, if he'd called it the Joan of Arc Symphony, or, the St. Joan Symphony, Symphonia St. Joan, then nobody would be arguing at all. So, and that's an interesting piece. It's on a Toccata label, and you might want to give it a listen. So after that, oh yes, Max Reger, his 4 Böcklin tone poems. Now that's a wonderful work. Actually, that's like the best thing Reger wrote orchestrally. It's a wonderful piece of music. It really is. I think it's tremendous. And the Böcklin tone poems are the Der Geigende Eremit. That the well, I guess that translates into sort of like the violinicized hermit, or the violin playing hermit, obviously, but Geigende can be an adjective. The hermit with the violin. And then you've got the play of the waves, as like Debussy. Only Reger's and Debussy's don't sound anything the same. And then there's the fabulous The Isle of the Dead, which Rachmaninoff turned into a real symphonic poem. And the last movement is called Bacchanal. And you've got 4 movements, just like the 4 movements of a symphony. It's a beautiful, evocative work. The best recording is Nimi Järvi's on Chandos. Go listen to it. Go have some fun with your Reger Böcklin tone poems. It's wonderful stuff, and very, very symphonic. It's German after all, and it's Reger, who's rigorously, polyphonically German, logical, developmental, symphonic. You know the drill. Well, how about Vincent d'Indy, his Poeme des rivages, the poem of the rivers, the riversides, it's a travelogue, it's a place thing, it's a nature thing, it's la mer for a landlocked country, basically, and quite lovely, and it raises all the same issues. I'm not going to keep going over the same points over and over again, but the D'Indy Poeme des rivages is something well worth considering in our list. And then there's Frank Bridge, The Sea. The Sea is, oh my goodness, a terribly symphonic piece. It's written around the same time as Debussy's La Mer. Doesn't really sound anything like it, and that's a wonderful, wonderful little piece. I played it. I had my community orchestra do it, and it's beautiful, and it's lots of fun to do, and it was very, very popular. It should be played much, much more often. Seascapes seem to be particularly susceptible to the symphony/symphonic poem ambiguity. And Frank Bridges' The Sea is certainly one of those, because it couldn't be more clear-cut, and it also has thematic recall. The end is the opening. It ends with the same tune. Da-da-da-da-da, ya-da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, it's beautiful. Anyway, so The Sea. Then there's Ibert, Escales, Ports of Call. 3 different places in 3 different movements. Quite enjoyable, delightful piece of music. I don't find it terribly symphonic. I think they're 3 sort of independent pieces, but they go together. They fit together. They create a multi-movement unity. And if a symphony, one definition of it is a multi-movement unity in which there's a sequence of moods and that makes sense and that offers variety, but also somehow seems to hang together in terms of balance and the tension and release of the thing, then yeah, why not? Why not? Joseph Suk, A Summer Tale. This is the sequel to the Azrael Symphony, which he called a symphony in 5 movements. Well, A Summer Tale, he calls a symphonic poem. I have no idea what the difference is between the Azrael Symphony and A Summer Tale, the symphonic poem. The only difference is that Azrael is, of course, the angel of death, and this was the piece he wrote after his wife, who was Dvorak's daughter, and had died suddenly, and Dvorak also died suddenly around the same time, and so he was exercising his grief at the loss. And maybe these 2 pieces are the ones that tell us what the difference might be, at least in the minds of some composers, because one is purely the expression of tormented emotion, very personal emotion, and the other is a little bit more ecumenical. It's part nature poem, part descriptive music, but also part of a larger program. The coming to grips with the transience of life. So I mean, it's 5 movements. It's a symphony. It's a beautiful piece. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. But, you tell me. It's absolutely wonderful. I mean, there's a movement called Blind Fiddlers, which is just exquisite. And there's a thing in the Noonday Sun with this wonderful lazy tune. Dum bum ba yada dum bum bum ba dum. It's so perfectly descriptive, but also so perfectly emotionally deep. It really is. He's a serious composer. So let's try something a little bit fluffier. Delius, North Country Sketches. Now there's a four-movement symphonic thingy, but Delius is impossible to tell what anything Delius wrote was because it's all just so impressionistic and so formally fluid. Is it a symphony? Is it not a symphony? What is it? It's a North Country sketch in four movements. Some of which can be rearranged because Beecham played them in a different order than in which Delius wrote them, But the North Country Sketches is one of Delius's masterpieces. It's a wonderful, wonderful nature poem, and possibly a symphony. After Delius, Roussel, Albert Roussel, Evocations. This is a big three-movement triptych, each of which is a different evocation, obviously, of something, and it has a vocal finale. So it's a choral symphony on top of it all. A wonderful work, a magnificent work. One of the great, French non-impressionist sort of orchestral extravaganzas. It's early Roussel, and it's first rate, and the best recording of that is on Chandos. Go listen to it. It's marvelous. Then let's try Holst, shall we? Beni Mora, which is he calls it like Oriental Rhapsody or Suite or something like that, but it's the same thing that Escales is. It has three separate movements. Each of them is something vaguely exotic and Asian, and they go beautifully together. And you can decide for yourself what you think. Then we have another guy who gets three entries, and Ernest Bloch. I just have to say, Ernest Bloch is phenomenal. A phenomenally fascinating composer who wrote no bad orchestral music. He was a fabulous composer of orchestral music. And he doesn't get played, nobody cares, and it makes me crazy. The three works are Poems of the Sea. Sound familiar? I don't need to say anything more about that. The Evocations. Sound familiar? His evocations are not the same evocations as Roussel's evocations, but they're just as evocative, extremely evocative. There's a really cool Chinese one in there. Yeah, I'm just giving it away. The three evocations, and Bloch always wrote in this sort of Frankian cyclical form. All of his pieces are extremely well constructed and thematically unified and developed. They are. That's just the way he was. So you could say, well, yeah, maybe that's a symphony. And then the three Jewish poems, which is not the same thing as like Baal Shem or From Jewish Daily Life or those other pieces for string solo and orchestra, for violin and orchestra, or cello and orchestra. These are three complete, wonderfully unified symphonic poems. They're beautiful, beautiful pieces. And these are substantial, 20, 25 minutes, you could call them symphonies. You really could if you wanted to. And after Bloch, Zemlinsky, Die Seejungfrau, The Mermaid. This is a big, multi-movement symphonic poem that is totally thematically integrated and as symphonic as any symphony. It's more symphonic than Zemlinsky's symphonies, the ones he wrote up to that point. The only reason we don't play it very much, actually it's been recorded a lot of times now, at least half a dozen times or more, is because it was premiered on the same concert as Schoenberg's Pelléas et Mélisande, Pelléas und Mélisande, and, everyone immediately forgot about the Zemlinsky because it's like really pretty, and the Schoenberg is like, 45 minutes of chromatic sludge. But the Zemlinsky is really beautiful and lovely, and there are wonderful recordings of it, so go listen to it. There was also a suite extracted from it, which is terrible. It should only be played complete in all three of its glorious movements. And then, oh yes, Smetana Ma Vlast. Of course, it has to be, but only when you play it all at once. Obviously, it's not a symphony, really. It's in 6 movements, but it does have the thematic unity throughout. And I suppose if it were not susceptible of having individual symphonic poems played separately, you could call it, the Czech National Symphony, and it would really be a symphony because it's extremely well thought out as a sequence to be played completely in order, in the proper order. However, However, we have to wrap this up with number 21, and number 21 is the ultimate symphony/symphonic poem. Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherezade. Of course! You thought I'd never get to it, did you? I mean, Scheherezade is a 4-movement symphony. Rimsky-Korsakov called it a symphonic suite. And the reason he didn't call it a symphony is because he said straight out, unlike a symphony, the process here is the enrichment of the themes through all of the different decoration and filigree and orchestration and color and those resources, not contrapuntal or developmental resources such as we find in German symphonies. I mean, that was the distinction that Rimsky-Korsakov drew. I'm not sure I agree with that distinction, because Scheherezade comes across as well integrated a symphony as anybody wrote. Some might say, well, yes, the themes come back and they repeat endlessly, but Rimsky-Korsakov knew what he was doing, and calling it a suite was probably smart on his part at the time in which he wrote it. But today, someone who did something like that could call it a symphony and nobody would bat an eye. Admit it, nobody would. It would be obvious. So there you go. Are they suites? Are they symphonies? You tell me. The list is down below, as I said. Have a good time with them. Listen to some of them if you don't know them. You're going to enjoy them. They'll give you something to sink your teeth into. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care.